parade and Easter bonnets for the patients of a mental hospital. Some of these people have spent many years here. A few have been here all their lives. But many of them come in just for the day. At night they return home. Not because there isn't room for them, but because they, their doctors, and most important of all, their relatives, want it to be that way. This mental hospital has stopped being, as many are, a dump for the unwanted. In the past few weeks, Britain's mental hospitals have come in for a hammering. There have been charges of cruelty, carelessness and indifference at some hospitals. In others, the staff are tired and dispirited, believing the immense problems of overcrowding in Victorian buildings can never be beaten. This hospital has no more money than any other mental hospital. Their buildings are equally massive and Victorian, but they've found an answer. 20 years ago, they decided to stop the dumping of patients. They began emptying their beds. Some patients who'd been inside for 40 years were helped back into society. It was the beginning of something different. As the patients went, so did the problems. Now, what's being done at this hospital could turn attitudes to mental health inside out.
I like to think that they look upon it as their home. They run the ward more or less as they wish to.
Yes, it's the best place I've been to.
Is it?
I've never had such a corned beef or bacon till I come here. I haven't.
We don't have any petty restrictions.
The public just doesn't know that it has altered. It doesn't know that the bars have been taken down. It doesn't know that the doors have been opened.
I've never been with kind people in my life like they are here.
If you want to call my patients nutters, then we're all nutters.
The hospital is Mapperley in Nottingham. It has patients of all kinds, men, women, adolescents and children, schizophrenics, manic depressives, people born subnormal, and old people losing their grip. The hospital wouldn't claim to cure them all, but at least it has given itself a chance to do so. The story of what's been done is told by the patients and staff themselves.
In 1948, the committee took over an old Victorian building, some 90 years old, drab, overcrowded, encompassed with high walls, which gave one a shut-in feeling. In every room you went, brown, green paints. In fact, it was what one was called the old lunatic asylum, the perfect example.
Feel a bit better, Graham?
Every ward's been modernized, every department's been modernized. And people regard it as a three-star hotel. We spent about $500,000 on upgrading the hospital till we got what I call a damn fine building. We haven't had outside benefactors at all. We've had to rely entirely upon our own resources to achieve our objective.
You all right, darling? How old are you now?
How do I? Oh, I don't know, I'm sure.
When I first came here, the patients, their hair was hanging down, bit of ribbon stuck on the top, and it looked like an institution. I cut everybody's hair short, permed them up to 90 years, 95 years, 96 years old. They really do appreciate it, even the very, very, very old ones. It's a form of therapy, you see.
Right, I want quickly to go through your ward estimates and pick out the main items and say to you, is it absolutely essential? Wallerton Ward, big item here. Now, sister, why should you want false ceilings when you've got nicely painted ceilings?
It does get rather cold up there, and I thought, if we had a false ceiling, there wouldn't be the same area to heat.
Conservation of heat, in other words, rather than anything else.
Yeah.
Because your present decoration of your ceiling's not bad at all.
Not very good. It's getting very dirty.
Well, of course, you can always have a wash down. But anyway, I'll refer that to the group engineer to get out an estimate of cost for putting in false ceilings, and then we shall have to see what the committee says about that one.
There need be very little frustration at ward level, because we always have some outlet for it. We can always find a solution to the problem. If we can't solve it at ward level, we can approach the matron, the secretary, and so on. And the communications are extremely good.
Can I just take this opportunity of welcoming you to Mapperley Hospital to briefly tell you what the tour is going to be. Now, if you would like to ask any questions about the function of the unit, then please feel free to do so.
One tends to think of people being violent and shut away and not on view to visitors to the hospital.
I don't think if you go throughout the whole hospital you'll see any more disturbed behaviour than in fact you've seen in this particular ward, where you perhaps see some degree of senility and grimacing faces and peculiar idiosyncrasies, and this is about the amount of disturbed behaviour you would see through any hospital, I think.
Our hospital, of course, is wide open to visitors of all descriptions. I don't necessarily mean just visiting relatives. We have groups coming from women's clubs, men's clubs, boys' clubs, girl guides, students, and they come in and they are genuinely amazed at what they see. They come into what we describe as the acute ward. And we say to them, this is our acute admission ward, where the more disturbed patient will be admitted. They expect to see all sorts of bizarre happenings and peculiar behaviour, straitjackets and locked doors. This isn't so.
The type of patients I have here are all chronic schizophrenics, noisy, neglectful of themselves, totally unable to cope for themselves. We try to get them out into the community as much as possible. And we have met the odd occasion when someone has said they shouldn't be out. People like this shouldn't be out. On the whole, we get quite a good reception, but you do get the odd occasion where a remark is passed that hurts, because this type of patient is unable to cope with any great stress. This does hurt them deeply.
The plan was to reduce overcrowding. Instead of 1,318 patients, it was hoped to bring that number down so to give more space in the hospital for day centres. Now, some 500 ex-patients are attending the hospital as day patients. We're a typical mental hospital in the Sheffield Regional Board area, and we get the same amount of funds as other hospitals. It's not what we get, but how you use them.
This means that many, many more patients can be treated than we have beds for. They go home to their own homes in the evening, or to the people, if they have any people. They come back to us in the morning. It extends to 7 days a week for some. It extends to 7:50 in the evening for others, so that really it relieves the pressure on beds. It enables us to keep these people under our eye.
That's a good old-fashioned pork today, I think we've got. A bit fat, but not bad. You've got old-fashioned pork. No stuffing, John? Little no, stuffing? No, thanks.
Here you are, Mrs. Mannion.
Thank you. I bet you don't have that on Monday. Where are you going?
I bet you shan't. Well, if I'm having it today, I shan't want it. It's only on Monday.
The largest problem with those who come to our day centre is that they are people who live alone, and are very, very lonely people indeed. The relatives don't want to know about them in a large number of cases, and they really need to feel that somebody cares about them.
No, I'd like you to come in on Monday, because we started off on these new tablets, and I want to make certain you have.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't know.
All right?
Yeah.
Well, we do have quite a large number of patients coming to the day centre who do create some problems for us sometimes, especially if they don't turn up. We have to keep tabs on them. We do get worried about them if they don't turn up to the day centre when we know they live alone. And generally, if this happens, if an ambulance driver reports that he's had no reply, we immediately go out and investigate the situation and find out why.
I feel we do regard ourselves rather as the forerunners. It isn't entirely ours. This is practice in other hospitals throughout the country. But I don't always feel that it's pursued quite so, shall I say, aggressively, in that we insist almost that the community accept its responsibility to these people. There's always been this backlog of feeling with a lot of the general public of fear of these patients. You know, they're mad, they might attack us, they might do all sorts of peculiar things. And this is one of the things we had to break down, and the only way we could do it was by getting as many patients out of the hospital as quickly as possible, so that we could say, in effect, look, this person is now well. They may be disabled in some way. You know, they may not be as active, either intellectually or physically, as the more normal members of the community, but on the whole, they were able to live within the community without causing disturbance. I'm one of a group of social workers employed by the hospital. My work is primarily concerned with patients admitted to hospital in the first stages of their illness, arranging for their discharge, and then seeing them at home, either with their relatives or in the hostels if they've been discharged to our hostel scheme. But for those who, of course, who had no home, we had to seek the help of a band of landladies we eventually found who were prepared to take in as lodgers groups of these patients. And this has helped the idea amongst the general public these patients can be contained. They are seen by the members of the public coming and going, conducting themselves perfectly well, and this, of course, has done a lot to kill the idea that these are a special breed or a breed apart from the ordinary race.
Hello, Mr. Adam.
Hi.
Good morning. Are you having any fine? Oh, things no problem? None whatsoever.
How's Mr. Stamp settled down?
Fine, thank you. Can you wait in the lounge a few minutes because we're just ready for starting dinner?
Certainly, right? The majority of Mrs. Adams' lodgers have been very long-term patients, and by this I mean patients who've spent anything from 20 to 40 years in hospital prior to coming here. Under the old scheme of things, they'd have been considered as permanent residents of the hospital.
Are you all right, Joe?
Yes, honey.
All right, Bobby?
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, we've got some of the worst cases, you know, but been with me 3 to 5 years. And they're violent in one way, but they're not in another, because we can always calm them down. Well, as a matter of fact, we had one the other evening, and he became violent. Well, I went upstairs to him, I just sat on the side of the bed, calmed him down, and explained it to him that he was still staying here, whatever happened, and he was a different person within 10 minutes or a quarter of an hour. You see, we mix ours with the workmen that we've got, our own ordinary boarders that's workmen. We mix them all together. I mean, if you'd been amongst these people like I have all these years, you really would understand the way they feel. I mean, they do express their feelings at times. And it must be a terrible thing when people turn around and say, oh, he's mental, he's crackers, we daren't come there, he's not safe, and all such as that. It must be a terrible feeling.
They had to be given simple jobs to begin with. And then as they advanced in their work techniques, then they're given more skilled jobs in their unit for industrial therapy. They trained them on factory lines. Until then, they could take a job in the community. And that is a long-term job. It may take 2 or 3 years to do that.
Yeah, don't you do any embroidery or anything like that?
I used to, but I don't now, though. I did tickets.
Tickets? What sort of tickets?
Any sort.
Any sort?
Any sort of tickets.
Different things for different firms?
Yeah.
I see. I think I've seen them before.
When you've done these books in 25, the D boxes.
Yeah.
And what's your cornerstone?
Yes.
We've had one or two that have been very good.
Yeah. How long have you been in this hospital, Harold?
About 30 years.
Wow. What was it like in the old days?
It was like a mental home, asylum. They had wards and cells to go in and out. And they used to put them in a cell if they went mad.
Have you been to a lot of places then?
Yes, 8. 8 times with 8.
Where did you start then?
Work camp. Well, I come when I was in the ward. I come to do some vegetables for Miss Murphy. And I've been ever since. I come to do the vegetables.
How do you like the people here?
Oh, I like them very much.
The Ministry of Health have passed on to us visitors from all over the world to come to Mapperley to see what has been done.
We've been building up the idea that we must get rid of the loony bin phrase, where once they're in forever.
Is someone else fetch me?
Yes.
And in addition, about 200 long-stay patients were rehabilitated and have no further need of hospital care.
Fastest man in England, go on.
Some of Mapperley's patients will never go home. They are hopeless cases, kept apart in a converted stately home, Aston Hall. This is the branch for the mentally subnormal.
I want one. Come on. Come on, Jamie.
Come on, Clifford, there we are.
We don't expect cures with this type of patient because they've been hospitalised for such a long period of time. And their behaviour over this period has been very abnormal.
Wait a minute, don't rush. Come on, come on. Come on.
The most we can do is to make them as happy and as socially viable as possible in hospital conditions. Most of the patients could not live an independent life and are simply not able to live in the community because they require constant medical and nursing care.
For these people, there can be no return home. But back at Mapperley, among those able to be cured, the most radical step, the gateway.
It's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie, a lie, a lie. Now the tail upon this ransom reached right down to hell, and every time he wagged it you could hear the fireman's bell.
We have a social therapy centre which we call the Gateway. At the very beginning we had the idea that this ought to be run by the patients themselves. The idea was to have a centre which had the same sort of facilities as a community association. Facilities for shows, a hall, changing rooms, an art room, a music room, lounge, a tea bar, where patients could gather together and feel relaxed and easy and away from the atmosphere of the wards.
Oh, they tempted him and they tempted him, and he refused it, and he refused it, till finally he took a glass of beer. When he saw what he had done, he dashed the liquor to the floor and staggered out of the door with delirium tremens. And while under the influence of alcohol, he met a Salvation Army lassie, and cruelly he smashed her tambourine. She said, "May heaven bless you," and made a mark upon his brow with a kick that she had learned before she got saved. And so, kind friends, forever shun the fatal curse of drink, and don't go around smashing people's tambourines.
Members of the staff attend the weekly committee meetings of the Gateway, but by invitation, and we do not have a vote.
I can prove myself here, perhaps, by working on the Gateway Committee. I feel this is important to prove that I can, or to reprove that I can do things fairly responsibly, conscientiously.
I think as far as I'm concerned, being a patient who is taking part in activities in the Gateway, I'm lucky in as much that I have some very good friends who understand some mental health problems. I mean, there's so many different types of mental illness, aren't there?
Exactly the point I wanted to make, is this grouping together of mental illness. Some of them look ill, some of them don't look ill, some of them are very capable, some of them are very incapable. You see, probably George, Arnold, myself have nervous illness, but we can probably walk down the road, walk into a pub, and we don't look necessarily, I hope, or I think, we don't look particularly mentally ill. There are people who, because of their illness and because of certain behavior connected with their illness, look mentally ill. And I think these are the people who are far more open to stigma.
Having activity in the Gateway and joining in with things with the outside public and helping me to talk. In fact, I think Dr. Wallace will agree that there was a time when I couldn't talk at all or wouldn't talk at all.
Now we can't stop you.
And now he can't stop me, which is probably time for me to let somebody else say something else.
It doesn't worry me that people know that I'm coming to the hospital, because I know what the hospital is, I know what it's like, and I know that it isn't the old-fashioned picture of a mental hospital. But I do feel that if I were to apply for a job, and they were to say, "What have you been doing the last couple of years, the last year?" and I said, "I've been in a psychiatric hospital," I do feel that there'd be immediately a query: is this chap reliable?
There have been times when we've all been angry with the attitude of the public, because we feel that the public doesn't understand, and what's much more important, the public isn't prepared to spend the money. And when you think that 43% of all the hospital beds in this country are occupied by people who are psychiatrically ill, and only about 14% of the money that is spent on hospitals is spent in psychiatric hospitals, it's not surprising that sometimes we get a bit annoyed.
There is still this dreadful feeling that exists amongst a great many people that mental illness is something that happens to somebody else. It doesn't happen to them, it's no concern of theirs. The people who suffer from it are in some way different. They're to be shunned, they're to be avoided, spoken about in hushed whispers, pitied, you know, in a very condescending sort of way. Very much the attitude of there, but for the grace of God, goes somebody else, certainly not me.
It's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie, a lie, a lie. Now the wool upon his back, sir, it reached right to the sky. The eagles nested in it, you could hear the young ones cry. It's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie, a lie, a lie. Now the horns upon his head, sir, they reached right to the moon. A man went up last Friday night and he didn't come back till June. It's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie, a lie, a lie. Now the tail upon this ram, sir, reached right down to hell. And every time he wagged it, you could hear the fireman's bell. It's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie.